Someone in your life has learned exactly which words make you flinch. They say them, and then they watch, because your reaction is the only real power they have over you. The moment you explain yourself, you hand it to them. The moment you justify, you confirm they had the right to question you. The moment you react, you tell them precisely where the wound is. Carl Jung understood this at the level of the psyche. What you defend, you reveal. And what you reveal, others learn to control. The unshakable man is not the man who feels nothing. He's the man who has made a single cold decision that his inner state is no longer available for public negotiation. 3 laws build that man. The first one begins the instant you stop doing the thing that feels most natural in the world. Here is the lie they raised you on, and it has kept you controllable your entire life. They told you that a good man always explains himself, that reacting is honest, that defending yourself is dignity, that if you're misunderstood, you owe the world a clarification. So you became a man who answers every accusation, justifies every choice, reacts to every provocation, and you called it integrity. But every explanation was a small surrender. Every justification confirmed someone else's authority to put you on trial. You spent your life proving yourself to people who were never entitled to the verdict, and you mistook the exhaustion for virtue. You didn't find this video by accident. Some part of you is tired of being so easily read, tired of the way the right comment can hijack your whole day, the way you rehearse defenses for accusations no one's even made yet, the way your calm can be dismantled by a single person who knows which string to pull. You came looking for the off switch, and by the end of this, you'll understand it was never one switch. It's 3 laws, and together they build a man whose inner state simply cannot be reached. The thumbnail names the core of it, the power of not justifying. By the end, you'll understand why refusing to justify yourself is not arrogance. It's the reclaiming of the one thing everyone has been using to move you. Understand what Jung is exposing, because it's the mechanism beneath all 3 laws. The reaction that betrays you, the flinch, the defensive explanation, the compulsive justification, does not come from your conscious mind. It comes from an unconscious wound you've never made conscious, and because it's unconscious, it fires on its own, automatically, the instant someone presses it. You don't decide to react. The wound reacts, and you call it your personality. And here is the cold part. Anyone observing you long enough learns where those unconscious buttons are, and once they know, they own the panel. They can move you at will, and you'll experience being moved as if it was simply who you are. You'll call your own controllability fate, or being honest, or just how I am. The path to becoming unshakable begins by dragging that mechanism into the light. Make the wound conscious, and it stops firing on command. What you've made conscious, no one else can operate. So here's what this is, plainly. This is dark psychology in its truest sense. The study of how people actually gain control over you, and how to close every door they use. Married to Jungian depth psychology, not vague motivation. I'm going to give you the 3 laws of the unshakable man. Never react, never explain, never justify. I'm going to show you the exact psychological reason each one strips power from the people using you. And I'm going to give you the hard reversal, the precise point where these laws curdle into a cold, walled-off avoidance that looks like strength and is actually a wound running the whole show from underground. Because getting this wrong doesn't make you sovereign. It makes you isolated and brittle while you tell yourself you're powerful. By the end, you'll know the difference, and you'll know which law to build first. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "unshakable" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Let's start with what your reaction actually is, because until you see it clearly, you'll keep handing it away and calling it honesty. In poker, they call it a tell, the small, involuntary signal that reveals what's in your hand. You have tells. Everyone who's ever tried to move you has studied them. The particular subject that makes your jaw tighten, the accusation that makes you rush to defend, the insult that lands in the exact spot you're most insecure about. When you react, you're not expressing yourself. You are broadcasting your hand. You're showing every person in the room precisely where you can be hit, and you're doing it for free. Here's the uncomfortable truth about why you react. Your reaction is not strength, and it is not sincerity, it's need. When someone provokes you and you fire back, some part of you needs them to understand, needs to correct the record, needs the accusation not to stand. And that need is the leash. A man who genuinely didn't need their approval, their agreement, or their correction would feel the provocation land and simply have nowhere for it to go. The comeback, the defense, the visible flinch, every one of them is a confession that the other person still has leverage over your inner state. Your reaction is the receipt proving they reached you. Sit in this because it stings. Most of what you've called being real, standing up for yourself, or setting the record straight was underneath, a nervous system that couldn't tolerate being misjudged. You weren't defending your truth. You were defending against the unbearable feeling of being seen wrongly, and that intolerance is the exact button everyone who's ever manipulated you has pressed. They don't even need to be right. They just need to say the thing that makes you perform your wound, and then sit back and watch you do it. Now exhale, because here's where the power begins. The instant you understand that your inner state is a hand you can choose to keep hidden, the entire game changes. You stop being a man who broadcasts and become a man who observes. The provocation comes, you feel it land, and instead of reacting, you simply watch. Watch them watching you, waiting for the tell that never comes. And in that silence, the power quietly reverses. They showed you their move. You showed them nothing. That reversal is the foundation the three laws stand on, and the first law is the one that makes it possible. The first law is never react, and understand exactly what it does and does not mean, because almost everyone gets it wrong and builds a repression that eventually explodes. Never react does not mean never feel. It means insert a gap between the feeling and the display. The reactive man has no gap. The provocation lands and the reaction fires in the same instant, welded together, which makes him a machine anyone can operate by pressing the right key. The unshakable man has built distance into that circuit. He feels the full charge of the provocation. He is not numb, and in the space between feeling it and showing it, he makes a choice. And the choice is almost always to reveal nothing. Not because he's suppressing, but because he understands that his reaction is currency, and he no longer spends it on people trying to rob him. Here's the mechanism that makes this so devastating to the people using you. Provocation is a transaction. They invest an insult, an accusation, a jab, and they're expecting a return, your reaction. It's the whole reason they did it. When you refuse to react, the transaction fails. They spent their move and got nothing back, and now they're standing there, exposed, having revealed their own hostility while you revealed nothing at all. Worse for them, your non-reaction reads, accurately, as power. It tells them the button they pressed isn't connected to anything anymore, that the wound they were aiming for either healed or was never as reachable as they thought. Nothing unnerves a manipulator like a man who doesn't flinch, because the flinch was the only tool they had. And here's the Jungian layer, because this is where it becomes real transformation instead of a performance. You cannot fake never reacting for long. If the wound is still live underneath, the suppression will leak or build or blow. The durable version of this law requires you to actually make the wound conscious, the way we discussed. To go into the thing that gets triggered and understand it, feel it fully in private, integrate what it's protecting, so that the button genuinely stops connecting to a live charge. That's the difference between a man white-knuckling his composure and a man who is actually unbothered. One is acting. The other did the shadow work. This law's true power comes only to the second man, and it's why silence, real silence, cannot be purely tactical. It has to be built on an interior that's been dealt with. But not reacting only closes one door. There's a subtler way you hand your power away, one that feels like maturity, and it's the second law. The second law is never explain, and this one will feel wrong at first because you were specifically trained to believe that explaining yourself is the mature, honest, considerate thing to do. That training was the leash. Here's what over-explaining actually does. When you explain yourself unprompted, when you rush to give reasons for your choices, your boundaries, your absences, your decisions, you are implicitly asking for approval. You're submitting your reasoning to be evaluated, treating the other person as a judge whose verdict you need before you can feel settled in your own choice. And people register this instantly beneath words. The man who explains everything teaches the world that his decisions are open for review, that he can be argued out of his position if the objection is strong enough, that his no is really a convince me otherwise. Every unnecessary explanation is a quiet transfer of authority, you handing someone the gavel and asking them to rule on a decision that was only ever yours to make. Watch the asymmetry because it's stark. The unshakable man makes a decision and states it, not defends it, states it. No, I won't be there. That doesn't work for me. No paragraph of reasons, no case built for the jury, no anxious justification trailing behind it. And the absence of explanation communicates something the explanation never could, that the decision is final, that it doesn't rest on reasons you could dismantle, that it issues from an authority that doesn't require your agreement to stand. A boundary with a long explanation attached is an invitation to negotiate. A boundary stated plainly and left, there is a wall. People push on invitations. They don't push on walls because there's nothing to grab. Now sit with the second moment of discomfort because it names your specific pattern. The reason you over-explain is that some part of you doesn't yet believe your own decisions are legitimate without external sign-off. You give reasons because you're afraid that without them, your choice isn't allowed. That you need to earn the right to your own boundary by justifying it well enough. That fear is the tell underneath the words, and the people around you have felt it and learned that your boundaries are soft, negotiable, dissolvable under enough pressure, because a man who needs to explain his no is a man who can be talked out of it. The over-explanation didn't make you more honest, it made you more porous. Here's the reframe that sets you free. A decision that comes from your own authority does not require a defense because it was never on trial. You are allowed to choose without submitting your reasoning for approval. You can be misunderstood and let the misunderstanding stand because your peace was never dependent on the other person's comprehension in the first place. The unshakable man is entirely willing to be misjudged rather than surrender his position to the endless negotiation of explaining himself. And that willingness to be misunderstood is one of the rarest and most powerful things a man can possess. But there's a third door, the deepest one, and it's the one the thumbnail points at directly. The third law is never justify. And this is the core of the entire philosophy, the one the thumbnail names, because justifying is the deepest surrender of all. Understand the distinction first. Explaining offers reasons. Justifying begs for absolution. Justifying is what you do when someone accuses you and you scramble to prove you're not guilty. And the scramble itself is the confession. Here's the psychological trap, and it's brutal once you see it. The instant you justify yourself against an accusation, you have accepted the accuser's authority to put you on trial. You've agreed to the premise that you owe them a defense, that their judgment of you is valid enough to require an answer, that the question of your guilt is legitimately open. It doesn't matter how good your justification is, you already lost the moment you began, because beginning conceded the entire frame. The person who accuses you and watches you justify has just confirmed they hold court over you, and they will hold court again because you taught them the trial is in session whenever they call it. Watch what the unshakable man does instead, because it's almost shocking in its simplicity. Accused, he does not defend. He does not prove his innocence. He declines the trial entirely, with silence, with a flat, think what you want, with a refusal to treat the accusation as something that requires his participation. He understands that his character is not evidence to be submitted, that his innocence is not contingent on convincing his accuser, that the moment he refuses to justify, the accusation has nowhere to land. An accusation needs a defense to become a trial. Denied the defense, it just hangs in the air as the accuser's problem, revealing more about them than about you. This is the power of not justifying. You strip the accusation of its power by refusing to grant it the one thing it needs to function, your engagement. And here's the Jungian depth beneath it, because this is where it stops being a tactic and becomes sovereignty. The compulsion to justify yourself comes from an unintegrated need for the world to confirm your goodness, a wound that says you are not acceptable until someone external certifies it. Make that conscious, and the compulsion dies. When you have genuinely become your own authority on your own character, when your sense of being a good and legitimate person no longer requires anyone's ratification, accusations simply lose their grip, because there's no longer an internal hook for them to catch on. The man who knows who he is cannot be shamed into justifying, because shame requires you to secretly agree with the accusation, and he doesn't. This is why the three laws cannot be pure performance. They rest on an interior that has been made conscious and claimed, which is exactly where the danger lives, and where I have to stop you. Here is the reversal that saves this entire philosophy from destroying you, and most channels teaching "stop explaining yourself" will never give it to you, because it's not flattering and it doesn't sell as cleanly. Every one of these three laws has a counterfeit that looks identical from the outside and is its exact opposite from within. The genuine article, never react, never explain, never justify, is built on an integrated interior. You feel everything fully, you've made your wounds conscious, and you simply choose not to make your inner state available to people trying to use it. The counterfeit is built on a wound that never healed. You don't react because you've gone numb. You don't explain because you've stopped caring whether anyone reaches you at all. You don't justify because you've walled yourself off from every human being, guilty and innocent alike. One is a man who could open fully to the right people and chooses his silence deliberately. The other is a man who has lost the capacity to open to anyone and calls his incapacity strength. And the counterfeit is seductive precisely because it's adjacent to the real thing, and it feels like power while it's actually rotting you. The walled-off man tells himself he's unshakable when he's really just unreachable, including to the people who love him, including to the connection that could actually heal him. He mistakes the flatness of repression for the calm of integration. He mistakes isolation for sovereignty. He's applied never react so totally that he no longer reacts to beauty, to intimacy, to his own life. And a man who feels nothing hasn't transcended his emotions, he's buried them. And buried emotions don't die. They run the whole operation from underground, exactly as Jung warned. The persona of the stone-cold man becomes a prison with the real man sealed inside it. So here is how you tell them apart, and you must install this, or the laws will betray you. The genuine, unshakable man is selectively opaque and deeply alive. He gives nothing to those trying to control him and everything freely to the few who've earned his trust. He doesn't react to provocations, and he's fully moved by his children, his purpose, the people he loves. He doesn't justify himself to accusers, and he's completely honest and open with the handful of people he's chosen. His silence is a gate he opens and closes with precision, not a wall with no door. The counterfeit is uniformly closed, opaque to everyone, alive to nothing, mistaking the absence of all vulnerability for the presence of strength. Ask yourself the brutal question: can I still open completely to the right person, be moved, be reached, be known by the few who deserve it, or have I gone numb and dressed the numbness up as power? Selective silence is sovereignty. Total silence is a wound with good posture. Get this right, and the 3 laws make you untouchable in the exact places you were being touched, while leaving you fully human in the places that make life worth protecting. Get it wrong, and you build a fortress with no one inside. Which brings us to what the 3 laws, correctly built, actually assemble into. So let's assemble the 3 laws into the single man they were always meant to build, because separately they're tactics, and together they're a transformation. Picture the man who has all 3, correctly integrated. Provoked, he feels the charge and reveals nothing, because he made the wound conscious, and the button connects to nothing live, never react. Questioned, he states his decision and offers no defense, because his choices issue from his own authority and were never on trial, never explained. Accused, he declines the trial entirely, because his sense of his own character requires no one's ratification, never justify. And underneath all 3 runs, the thing that makes them real rather than performed, an interior he has actually dealt with so that the calm is genuine and the silence is chosen, not white-knuckled. That is the unshakable man. Not a man who feels nothing, a man whose inner state is simply no longer available for public negotiation. And watch what this does to the people who used to move you, because it's remarkable. The one who learned your tells presses the button and gets nothing, and after enough failed presses stops pressing, because the whole point was your reaction and you stopped supplying it. The one who used to argue you out of your boundaries states their objection and finds no explanation to grab onto, no reasoning to dismantle, just a wall, and walls don't invite negotiation. The one who used to shame you into justifying yourself throws the accusation and watches it hang in the air with nowhere to land, and slowly realizes the court they used to hold over you has been permanently dismissed. You didn't fight any of them. You simply stopped participating in the game that gave them power, and the game collapsed for lack of your cooperation. And here's the meaning fully unlocked in that thumbnail: the power of not justifying. It was never about being cold or superior or above other people. It's that every form of control anyone has ever had over your inner state operates through a single door: your compulsion to react, to explain, to justify, to make your inside available to their pressure. Close that door, and you close every lever they own at once. Most men run on borrowed composure that collapses the instant someone finds the right button. You'd be running on your own, generated from an interior you made conscious and claimed, and that self-possession is the entire source of the gravity people will feel around you and never be able to name. So here is the truth the whole video was built to deliver. You were never controlled by other people's words. You were controlled by your own compulsion to respond to them. The provocation, the accusation, the misunderstanding, none of them had any power until you supplied the reaction, the explanation, the justification that handed it over. Never react, never explain, never justify is not a wall against the world. It's the reclaiming of the one thing that was always supposed to be yours alone, your inner state, sealed off from everyone who was using it to move you, and opened, deliberately, only to the few who've earned the right to be let in, and understand what that makes you. not cold, not empty. Sovereign. A man of deep feeling who has simply stopped leaving that feeling on the table for anyone to play. A man who can be provoked and stay level, accused and stay settled, misunderstood and stay at peace, because his sense of himself finally comes from inside the one fortress no one else can enter. The world will feel that in you long before it understands it, and it will reach for the nearest word. They'll call it confidence. They won't know it was the day you stopped defending yourself to people who were never entitled to the verdict that built it. So if this landed, if you felt the exact places you've been handing your power away, the reactions and explanations and justifications you've mistaken for integrity, comment the word unshakable, not as a boast, as a marker in time, the moment you decided your inner state was no longer available for public negotiation. And if you want to keep building from here, deeper into Jungian psychology, emotional sovereignty, and the real architecture of the unshakable mind, then subscribe, because this is the only place that treats your silence as sovereignty to be engineered, not coldness to perform. This is the room for the men sealing the door no one gets to open again. Picture it a year from now, already true. The person who learned exactly which words made you flinch will say them and watch and get nothing, and they won't understand what changed, only that the power they had is gone. The few who are real will find you more present than ever, more open, more genuinely reachable, because a man who gives nothing to those who'd use him has everything left to give to those who won't. You'll move through the world selectively opaque and quietly alive, and people will assume you were simply born unbothered. They won't know you built it, law by law, out of the wreckage of the man who used to explain himself to everyone. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. What you've begun to build here has a next chapter, and you don't want to meet it unprepared. Trust me, I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.